A man named Mike has never fully moved on from the disappearance of his twin brother Eddie when they were 12 years old. 28 years later, the same strange occurrences are happening in his hometown, and he must return to prevent history from repeating itself. During a TV interview, the host introduces Dr. Mike Painter, a child psychologist who had just released a new book. Mike describes adulthood as a sophisticated mask that hides who people are as children. The host then asks how the doctor lost his identical twin brother, Eddie. Mike pauses for a few seconds before explaining that in 1988, in his hometown, Iron Hill, Ohio, an unknown serial killer terrorized the town with the murders of 5 children. Eddie, the last victim, was never found. Mike was sent to live with relatives after Eddie's disappearance and hasn't returned since. Shortly after, the host places a telephone on the table with a 12-year-old boy whose family recently went through tragedy on the line. He wants Mike to speak to the boy and show the viewers how he does his job. The doctor is bemused at first, looking around at the people watching them, then the boy speaks. Then, the doctor introduces himself and asks if there's anything the boy would like to talk about. The boy doesn't answer, and the doctor hears a faint static sound and gets anxious. Suddenly, the boy giggles creepily, and the doctor tells him to turn their TV off. The boy asks why he's scared to come home, so Mike hangs up. Moments later, Mike looks back at the camera people and realizes they're mannequins. The phone starts ringing, and the host asks the doctor why he's scared to come home. Suddenly, a creature made of sticks and branches on fire walks down a hallway. That morning, Mike lies awake in bed and then checks his watch on the bedside table next to a picture of his family. Later, Mike drives to Iron Hill and remembers his memories with Eddie when he was still alive. Mike arrives at his childhood home where his mother, Marla, and a young girl, Katie, look at a lifeless goldfinch on the ground. Marla is surprised to see her son, and the girl asks her who he is, so she introduces them to each other. Inside the house, Mike sees photos of Marla with her piano students, but none of him or Eddie. Moments later, Marla confesses her fears that Mike's visit might reopen wounds for them and the community. In his head, he sees a distressed woman on the phone and a man cutting his arm with a knife. Later that day, Mike visits his childhood friend Gary, the town sheriff, and asks if he could take a look at the files on the 1988 murders. Mike remembers the bodies of the children strewn up on a tree. Gary says it's been 28 years since it happened, but Mike reminds him the children were also missing their teeth. The sheriff asks him why he'd want to see the files now, and his friend says it's for a book he's writing. The sheriff thinks he can help Mike get the files, but wants him to come over to their house for dinner first. That evening, Mike feels out of place around Gary's friends at the dinner table. He and Jessica, his childhood friend and Gary's wife, reminisce about their memories with Eddie and how they used to watch TV together. Meanwhile, Katie watches an old kids show on TV featuring puppet pirates. The TV becomes static and flashes disturbing images in between frames. Mike sees Katie on his way to the bathroom and tells her he's friends with her mom. Katie signals that they need to be quiet and looks back at the TV, but the screen is blank. Minutes later, Mike looks unsettled upon returning to the table and asks everyone if they remember the TV show Candle Cove. Jessica remembers, and Mike says it ran for 2 months, September and October 1988. He says Katie mentioned that she was watching the show. Jessica discloses how the show gave her nightmares, and Tim, Gary's friend, remembers the character Jawbone, a skeleton with a robe and black hat. Mike remembers himself as a child cowering to a corner and looking scared. All the talk of Candle Cove upsets Mike, so he thanks the couple for dinner and leaves. On his way home, Mike sees the spruce trees which remind him of Eddie. In 1988, Eddie, Mike, and Gary have wounds on their faces as they walk toward Gene, Tim's brother. Mike begs his twin to go around the property because Gene will beat them up again. Outside the house, Gene and Eddie trade insults and fight. Gene pins Eddie to the ground and orders Gary to hold Eddie's arm. The bully asks Eddie if his twin can feel his pain before breaking his finger. Meanwhile, Mike helplessly cries because Gene's friends outnumber them. Finally, Gene lets Eddie go, and the injured boy runs away as his twin looks disappointingly at a guilt-ridden Gary. At the house, Mike finds his twin crying in front of the TV and apologizes for not helping him. Suddenly, the TV turns on, showing static, and then Candle Cove starts playing. In the present, Mike lies awake in bed when the TV turns on by itself, so he gets up to turn it off. Suddenly, he hears Eddie call his name from the corner, and when he turns to look, Jawbone is standing there. Mike remembers being frozen in fear seeing Jawbone in that exact spot as a child. The following morning, Marla sees Mike standing outside the house facing the river. At breakfast, Mike tells Marla he was sleepwalking, and she mentions that his twin used to do it more. Mike's been having nightmares lately, and she hopes being home helps him sleep. Seconds later, Mike sees a man in a brown jacket by the woods looking at the house. Marla thinks the person's just out for a walk, but he says the man was standing still. In Gary's house, Jessica goes to Katie's room to wake her up, but she isn't there. At a diner, Mike has a pleasant conversation with his old English teacher, Mrs. Booth. Then Jessica walks through the door looking for Mike. In the spruce trees, Mike, Jessica, and several police officers search for Katie. Back in 1988, Eddie confronts Gene despite Mike's protests. Gene feints punching Eddie, but he doesn't flinch, so Gene and Tim walk back to the house. Outside the house, Gene sets his Rottweiler dog loose. It chases Mike to the edge of the property where it stops, walks over to Eddie, and licks his hand. In the present, Jessica says Marla told her that Mike came home at 3 a.m., 5 hours after he left the dinner party. Mike thinks Candle Cove has something to do with Katie's disappearance because the show aired only during the murders. He recalls Eddie acting differently after watching the show. Although Mike insists he isn't crazy, Jessica admits she knows he just got out of Stovington 3 days ago and was admitted after a psychotic episode. Mike then remembers his wife calling the police and him cutting his arm with a knife. Jessica wants to know where he was last night, but Mike insists whoever made Candle Cove is to blame for Katie's disappearance. Jessica doesn't believe Mike and turns away, but when she turns back, he's gone. Jessica tells her husband she believes Mike knows where Katie is. In Gary's house, Dane, Katie's brother, says his sister told him Mike would talk to him. The doctor asks what else Katie said, and he mentions the crow's nest. Then, Mike recalls a memory of Jawbone in the woods, then leaves. Mike heads home and tells his mother he plans to search for Katie past the woods, near the signal tower. As Mike walks through the woods holding a knife, he remembers being there, dragging and bearing something when he was 12. When Mike reaches the edge of the woods, he sees Jawbone and approaches him. Jawbone stands still, so Mike reaches out to touch him. Suddenly, Jawbone grabs his arm, but Mike slashes him with a knife and the cloaked figure runs away. Mike chases Jawbone through the trees but loses sight of him. On a tree next to Mike is a wooden arrow sign with a picture of a crow. On the cliff over the crow's nest, the tree where the children's bodies were found, Mike recalls seeing Eddie standing next to a boy who steps over the cliff's edge. Suddenly, Mike hears rustling near the rocks behind him and slowly walks toward it. Mike remembers Eddie with a hook buried in his chest and falling to the ground. Afterward, Mike finds Katie by a large rock and he carries her back through the forest. A few seconds later, a creature covered entirely in human teeth, the Toothed Child, crawls to where Katie sat and picks up 2 of the teeth she left behind. Later that day, Gary lets Mike out of the cell because Katie said the TV told her where to go. Mike reminds him he got Katie back, but his friend still doesn't completely trust him. At the front desk, Mike sees Tim wearing the same jacket the man in the woods wore. Outside the police station, Jessica assumes that the doctor plotted Katie's disappearance and purposely saved her just so he could put it in his book. However, Mike reveals that he didn't return home to write a book, but because something was calling him back. In his bedroom, Mike applies ointment on the cuts on his arm that read, "Mike, come home." Abruptly, Marla enters the room, and Mike asks if she remembers Candle Cove, and she does. She asks who made up Candle Cove, and he's confused by her question. She says the twins used to watch the TV, but it was only static, and Candle Cove was just in their imagination. All over town, kids are watching Candle Cove on their TVs. Later that night, in a motel room, Mike answers a call and hears Eddie's voice asking him where he's going, and they're just getting started again. In early November 1988, a man finds Gene's decomposing body on the ground. When he looks up at the tree, he sees the other children hanging on the branches. In the present, Katie watches Candle Cove and the puppet, Horace Horrible, says they miss her and tells her to look under her bed and to visit them in the cave. The following day, Jessica and Gary hear Dane's screams, and they run to his room. On the floor of Dane's room is a hook with blood dripping. Later, Jessica calls Mike, asking him to come back to town because Katie stabbed Dane in his sleep with a hook. They don't know where Katie found the hook, and she won't talk to them. That evening, Mike returns to their house, and Marla tells him Katie would never hurt anybody. He thinks someone or something made her do it, and he'll try to stop it. The next day at the hospital, Jessica tells Gary she asked Mike to talk to their daughter. Her husband doesn't trust him, but reluctantly agrees with her decision for their daughter's sake. Later, Mike runs into Tim at the hospital, and they have a tense encounter by the elevator. On his way to Katie's room, Mike spots a child's drawing on the wall depicting images from Candle Cove. At a local TV station, Marla asks an employee about Candle Cove, and he shows her his fanfic version of the show. She asks him if he watched the show as a kid, and he says all the kids did. But it wasn't on one channel. You had to find the show by turning the dial on the TV, and no one has a copy of the show because problems with the signal made it unrecordable. Moments later, Gary sees Mike enter Katie's hospital room and leaves without talking to him. Mike shows Katie the drawing and asks if she knows what it is. When the girl doesn't respond, the doctor asks what happened when she watched Candle Cove. She asks him how long jail will be, so he assures her that she's not going to jail because what happened wasn't her fault. Instead of Katie, Mike sees his 12-year-old self lying in the hospital bed. He asks the boy where he was, and the boy says he's been there too. Outside, Gary watches Mike talking to his daughter on the security monitor. In the room, Katie says she went to the cave with a boy who was underground for a long time. She says somebody took the boy to the cave, and Mike asks who put the boy in there. The girl doesn't answer his question and tells him he has to go inside. Abruptly, Gary interrupts the conversation, and the men leave the room. In the security monitor, the toothed child enters Katie's room and approaches her before the screen goes black. In the hallway, Gary tells Mike that he and Jessica should be present the next time Mike talks to Katie. The doctor asks him if there are missing person cases in town or the nearby counties, but Gary says no. The doctor tells Gary that his daughter will be fine, and he leaves. Elsewhere, Officer Amy investigates a missing keepsake box in Beth's house. Beth says she keeps cheap stuff and her son Alex's baby teeth in the box and wonders why anyone would want it. At home, Mike tapes the drawing on the TV while he talks to his daughter Lily on the phone. In the middle of the conversation, Lily's voice changes, and she tells him he has to come inside. Her father is unnerved at what he hears, but then Lily continues the conversation in her regular cheerful voice. Later, Marla sees the drawing on the TV, and Mike says he thinks Katie drew it. His mother says the illustration reminds her of the old cement plant near the railroad where Mike and Eddie used to play. Hours later, Mike and Marla walk along the railroad, and he asks her how she can stay in the town when all he sees when he's there is his twin brother. He expresses his resentment for being sent away, and she says she did it to protect him. She still wishes to hear Eddie knock on the door all these years later. Outside the cement plant, they see a boy, and Mike tells his mother to stay outside while he talks to him. Then, Mike follows the boy up the stairs inside the plant, and remembers him and Eddie exploring the abandoned facility as children. Through an arched opening in the wall, Mike follows the boy into a dark room, where he finds Eddie's body surrounded by lit candles. That evening, the police close off the building and are yet to confirm the body's identity with an autopsy. In Eddie's room, Marla cries as she stands, looking down at her late son's trunk. She remembers talking to Eddie after Gene broke his finger and telling her sons how they always have to look out for each other. In his bedroom, Mike hears his mother crying and remembers holding the hook when he was a kid. The next day, Mrs. Booth comes over with food and tells Marla how her friends brought her food when they found her son's Jacob's body in 1988. In his room, Mike lies awake in bed, thinking about how he watched Candle Cove when he senses something behind him. When he turns around, Horace Horrible stands beside his bed and tells him all his secrets will be safe in Candle Cove. That night, Mike holds Marla's hands and confesses he was the one who killed Eddie and buried him in the woods. When the police checked where he had buried his twin, the body wasn't there, so he thinks someone took him. Distraught over Mike's confession, his mother tells him to leave, but he doesn't let go of her hands and says there's more he needs to say. She slashes his hand with a knife to break away from his grasp, and she leaves the room. Somewhere, a person adds more teeth into a jar. In a dream, Mike is walking between the spruce trees and sees Eddie in front of him. They smile, but Mike falls into a hole as he approaches his brother. Mike wakes up from the dream where he hears a knock on the door. At the door, Gary wants Mike to come with him to the station to answer some questions about what Marla told him. In Gary's truck, Mike notes that the sheriff missed a turn to the station. Gary doesn't answer, and Mike asks where he's taking him. That night, in Mrs. Booth's backyard, she waits for the toothed child to come out of the woods and feeds it teeth from the palm of her hand.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.